In this lecture, we are going to moving on to some interesting macroeconomic concepts. We have 5 main points. We will look at the macroeconomic goals. We will look at employment and unemployment. Then we will look at the different types of unemployment. And then we will visit inflation. And we will take a look at economic fluctuations, meaning recessions and economic booms. So let's start with the first section, which covers macroeconomic goals. So what are the main macroeconomic goals? The first one is really employment. So every government is trying to attain full employment. So the government generally uses policies. And we will soon be taking a look at the two main policies which are used, fiscal and monetary policies, in order to achieve full employment. People want to get jobs. The second is price level stability. So people are not happy when they cannot predict prices and prices are changing all the time. So you generally want prices to be stable so that if you have a job and generally your job has a fixed salary or wage, you want to be able to know that you'll be able to pay your rents, you'll be able to buy your groceries. So price stability is very important, and it's also important for entrepreneurs. So you have policies that target it, that does everything possible to maintain a stable rate of prices. And then we have economic growth. Here we are talking of the amount of goods and services produced over a period of time in a given country. So generally, that is considered as a measure of living standards. So the government really wants to achieve economic growth as they are doing that because they really want to improve the living standard of people. So most of the time, policies will target the growth rate of real gross domestic product. Why do we say real gross domestic product? It's because we are taking off the effect of inflation. So when this happens in a society, people are generally pretty happy. So generally, when we talk of real gross domestic product, we are simply looking at a total market value. So when we say market value, it means we express it in dollars of all final goods and services produced in a given period, generally a year or a quarter, in a given country. But you don't just look at the market value, you take off the effect of inflation. That's why we say adjusted for inflation. So it's generally used to measure the level of output or production. So when we talk of output or production, we are looking at the production of goods and services in the entire economy. So after this topic, that's the next topic we'll be visiting. We'll be taking a look at economic growth or inflation as a next main topic, in the next chapter. So let's take a look. So given that we've talked of the main economic goals, here you can see so we want to take a look at inflation. So here is the annual unemployment rate. You can see how it fluctuates over time. Here is the annual growth rate of real GDP. So we are talking of the amount of goods and services produced. Generally, when you see it go below zero, we generally know that it's a signal that we are either entering or we are in a period of recession. So when we visit it, we'll clearly define what we mean by recession and things like that. And here is the annual inflation rate. In other words, you are looking at the cost of living. So this is the fluctuation of the cost of living. We want it to be stable. Unemployment rate, we want it to be, this is unemployment rate. We want it to be pretty low. And here is the output or the real GDP. We generally want it to be high. Okay, so we see how it's been changing across time. Now, let's talk about certain concepts. So why do we want these macroeconomic goals? It's really because of quality of life. So most societies really want to improve the quality of life, and they do everything possible to reduce what the society considers as bad. For example, pollution and crime. So even though they are trying to increase the amount of goods and services produced, but they want to do everything to reduce VAT in order to have a certain quality of life. They also want fairness. In other words, they want the fair distribution of income or wealth. You don't just want economic growth to happen, but all the proceeds are going just to 1 or 10% of the population. You want some fairness in the distribution of the wealth of the nation. Here you also have self-sufficiency. You don't want to be an economy whereby all your strategic sectors are being produced outside. For example, if all the food we eat in Canada and the energy we use is coming from abroad, that's not a good idea. So most countries try to be self-sufficient in food and energy so that in case there is a geopolitical issue, they should not be stranded. Now let's move on to the second section. We did say we have 5. Let's take a look at the second one, where we are looking at employment and unemployment. So what is unemployment rate? Are unemployment statistics accurate reflections of the labor market as provided by Statistics Canada in Canada? How long is someone typically unemployed, and what is the labor force participation rate? All of these questions, we are going to attempt to answer them in a few minutes, well, in this section. So generally, when we talk of unemployment rate, we are looking at a percentage of people in the labor force who are unemployed. In a few minutes, I'll clearly explain what we mean by labor force and what we mean by unemployed when we take a look at a diagram, I think on the next slide. But just know that unemployment rate is simply the ratio of those who are unemployed versus the labor force. And the labor force, you are looking at persons older than 15 years. So 15 years of age and over who are employed or unemployed. So the labor force is the combination of the people above 15 who have a job or who are actively searching for a job. Now, the worst unemployment in Canada occurred in the 1930s. This is during the period known as the Great Depression. Okay, so here, this diagram is extremely important. It's important for you to understand the diagram, because once you understand it, every calculation under this topic, you'll be able to do it. So you have 1, 2, and you have the third part of this diagram. If you understand it, you are really good. Now, here we call all those who are 15 years and above the working age population. Okay, it's important to remember that term. The working age population refers to those who are 15 years and above. They have the right to work. Now, among those who have the right to work, you have those who do not have a job and are not searching for a job. So we refer to them as people who are not in the labor force. Now, among those who are above 15, you have those who have a job or who are actively searching. When you have a job, you are considered employed. When you are actively searching for a job but cannot find, you are considered unemployed. So the employed have a job, the unemployed are actively searching. The labor force consists of those who have a job and those who are actively searching but cannot find. Now, if you take a look, those who are above 15 and who are part of the labor force, when you do the math, when you divide labor force by the working age population and you multiply by 100, it gives you what we call the participation rate. It's important to remember, labor force divided by working age population gives you the participation rate. They are actively participating in paying taxes and producing the goods and services in the nation. This group is not doing that for one reason or another. So if you win the lottery, you win maybe 500 million, it's very likely you will join this category. Well, for sure, I will do that for maybe a year or two before coming back here as an entrepreneur. So here is your labor force, which is employed and unemployed. Now, you have the employment rate. It is simply employed divided by labor force multiplied by 100. We've said labor force is employed plus unemployed. In other words, the employment rate is the employed divided by the labor force times 100. The unemployment rate is the unemployed divided by labor force times 100. And of course, we've just said labor force is the employed plus unemployed. So that's what the diagram is trying to present. Now, for example, we say, what is the unemployment rate? It is the unemployed, number of unemployed, divided by labor force times 100. And here you have an example. Okay? You can always do that just looking at the numbers. When we do those activities, you can look at the numbers and you'll be able to play around with it. And here we see the unemployment rate over time since 1976 in Canada. And here you can see the unemployment rate by the different age groups. And you can see that those who are between 15 and 19 have the highest unemployment rate. And those who are from 45 to 64 have the lowest. Here you have the different provinces in Canada. And here are most of the developed countries. You can see that South Africa seems to have the highest, and Japan seems to have the lowest. Now, when we talk of unemployed, it's very important to remember that the data we get from Statistics Canada do not take certain things into account. For example, it only looks at those who are actively searching. It doesn't take into account the discouraged workers. You have some people who have searched for jobs and they've gotten to a point where they are just discouraged. They've stopped searching. On the other hand, you have those who are just part-time workers. So they are counted as fully employed, but actually they are not fully employed. They are just working, who knows, maybe 10 or 15 hours a week, but they will like to work more hours. And finally, you have those who are working underground. It can be legal or illegal. It simply means you are working under the table. You are not paying any taxes for the money you are receiving. Okay. So another interesting question is, how long is someone typically unemployed in Canada? So the duration of unemployment is quite important. Most of the time it's above 13 weeks. And you are talking of 40 to 50% of all those who are unemployed. So generally, when you look at long-term unemployment, it's above 13 weeks. And those who are unemployed short-term, it's just less than that. Okay. So here you can take a look at the duration of unemployment from 1976 to 2021 and see here, this is the average over time, but you can see what happens from year to year. Okay, generally you will not want to be around this type of period and lose your job. It will be pretty long for you to get something else to do. Now, we are just saying that in Canada, teenagers have the highest rate of unemployment. Why? Because they have not had time to develop marketable skills. So most of them, some of course have it, but most of them do not have the skills that they can really, they don't have a lot of marketable skills. Now, we did mention the labor force participation rate. It's simply the percentage of population in the labor force. In other words, labor force divided by working age population. Now, it's important to note that since 1976, the labor force participation rate has ranged from 61.5% to nearly 68%. In other words, we are saying that those who are above 15 or who have the right to get a job, only this percentage of them are working or actively searching for a job. Generally, a nation wants it to be as high as possible. So the labor force participation rate increased from 1976 to 2008, due mainly to the entry of baby boomers into the labor force. and a 17% increase in the participation of women. So you generally want women to join, because you can see that among those who have the lowest participation rate across time, it's been women, and men have the highest. Who knows why? I won't get into it here. I'll let you think about it. However, measures have to be taken to do everything possible to get them to join that. For example, have daycares which do not cost so much, and so on and so forth. Now, in the next video, we'll take a look at the different types of unemployment.